Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying your Memorial Day and celebrating the lives of all the men and women who died to keep us free. So today I like to keep a tradition alive. I took it from Rush Limbaugh, who every Memorial Day told his story. I've been trying to do it every year on Blue Collar Catholic. It's the story of the Battle of Fort McHenry. And it goes like this. True story. It was the War of 1812. We declared war on the British. And the British were looking to get us back for kicking their butts in the Revolutionary War, where some peasants in America that love freedom so much beat the greatest military in the world at that time and defeated a tyrannical king who wanted to take our freedom away. Well, in the War of 1812, at the Battle of Fort McHenry, a young lawyer named Francis Scott Keyes went for a prisoner exchange, rowed up to, on a rowboat up to a British vessel to meet with their captain. And he said, "I'm here for the prisoner exchange." And the captain said, "Francis, there'll be no prisoner exchange today. You see those ships coming over the horizon?" And there were hundreds of them coming. He says, "On my command, they're going to start bombing your fort." And Francis said, "You can't. We have women and children at that fort." He goes, "Well, don't worry. I've already sent a messenger with a Union Jack flag. And all they got to do is lower that flag. You see your big American flag over the ramparts? They lower it and put our flag up, and we'll stop bombing." And Francis said, "Well, can I visit the prisoners?" He's like, "Yeah, go down." So he went down below and visited the prisoners, chained up, hungry and dirty. He explained what happened. He said, "Listen, they're going to start bombing, and they have overwhelming force. I don't know how we're going to keep that flag. I don't know how we're not going to surrender." And they're like, "They can't surrender." And so they prayed to the Lord that the Americans at Fort McHenry would have the fortitude, strength, and courage not to surrender to the tyrannical British force. And they said, "Francis, please let us know what's going on." So Francis went up there, and the captain said, "Fire." And they started bombing the fort. And Francis watched and watched as they bombed it. And the captain was looking through his telescope, said, "They're not lowering that flag. I want every gun on that flag." So they just started bombing that flag. And the prisoners down below shouted, "Francis, does the flag still stand?" And Francis says, "Yes, the flag is still standing." And then as it got dark, they shouted, "Francis, does the flag still stand?" He's like, "All I can see is bombs bursting in air. I can't see the flag." And then by the dawn's early light, they said, "Francis, now look, see if you could see the flag. Does the flag still stand?" And Francis looked by the dawn's early light, and he can see our flag, the American flag. And he shouted, "Boys, the flag still stands." And they shouted hallelujah and praises to God. And then Francis said he overheard the captain say to his first mate, "How is that bloody flag still standing? What is holding that flag up?" So the first mate looked with his telescope, said, "Captain, the flag is being held up by dead Americans." He's like, "What? What are you talking about?" He's like, "There's bodies of dead Americans stacked 30 high. Apparently, every American that was holding that flag when he was killed, another American climbed on top of him. The flag is being held up by dead Americans." And Francis Scott Key says he remembered the words of General George Washington at that time, who said, "The Christian American would rather die on his back than live on his knees." And throughout all history, our flag has been held up by dead Americans. And Iwo Jima, at that iconic picture of the U.S. Marines putting that flag up, my Uncle Joe was there, and he watched his best friend, his 19-year-old best friend, get his head blown off. And Uncle Joe came home, but his mind never did. He had what they call shell shock, what we now call PTSD. On the other side of the world, my grandfather was fighting the Germans. And in both instances, the Americans won. Thanks to dead Americans giving their lives, holding that flag up. See, the imperialistic Japanese believed their emperor was a god and their god should rule the rest of the world. And Hitler, he wanted to rule the whole world. Everyone wanted to take away our freedom, but dead Americans kept us free. The North Koreans wanted to take away the freedom of the South Koreans, and dead Americans kept them free. In Vietnam, unfortunately, our weak politicians allowed us to lose that war, but it was, again, the communists wanted to take away freedom. And 9/11, remember 9/11, when these people hated our freedom. These radical Islamists hated the freedom to worship Christ. They hated the freedom we had in America, and they wanted a caliphate. They attacked us, they sucker punched us, and when we kicked their butt, we annihilated them, we eliminated that threat. But it took dead Americans, like devout Catholic Petty Officer Michael Mansour, when his Navy SEAL team was on a roof with our Iraqi allies, a hand grenade hit him in his chest and fell on the floor. He had the time to jump to safety, but instead he jumped on that hand grenade and gave his life for his friends. There's no greater love than a man lay down his life for his friends. And today we celebrate the men and women who laid down their lives for us, so we can celebrate Memorial Day and have a 3-day weekend and live in freedom and not in fear of terrorists attacking us, our communists taking away our freedom, our tyrants, tyrannical kings taking away our freedom. We are free in America, and we are safe in America because we have brave men and women that have the courage to look the enemy in the eye and fight back. So thank God today for all these men. Thank God that our flag is still being held by dead Americans. And don't lose hope. Don't lose hope, because it wasn't too long ago that 9/11 happened. And I remember 9/12, when there were no Republicans and there were no Democrats. There were no blacks and there were no whites. There were no Asian, there were no Hispanic. There were just one kind of American. They were called Americans. Freedom-loving Americans got together. And in the bluest of states, New York City, they cheered on a Republican president when he said, "I hear you." And pretty soon those who did this to us, they're going to hear us. And they did. They heard us, and they ran like little girls as our military kicked the crap out of the terrorists. And we got complacent, for 8 years. After 9/11, everybody held an American flag. And then shortly after that, we elected a Marxist-loving president, and people started disrespecting our flag and kneeling during the national anthem, But after 4 years of Joe Biden's tyrannical government, and all these tyrannical governors, people are about to vote for freedom again. And it's not about Democrat or Republican, it's about freedom. And I feel a new revival of freedom-loving Americans about to make this election too big to rig. So God bless America. Thank God for our men, the fighting men of America that gave their lives. And remember that freedom isn't free. These sounds like cliches, but they're cliches because they're true. Freedom isn't free. And all gave some, but some gave all. God bless America, and stay Catholic.